Dog finds elderly woman tied to cactus in the desert. The reason leaves everyone. The desperate barking echoed through the desert for over 2 hours before someone finally heard it. Martha Wilson, 73 years old, was tied to the thorny trunk of a giant saguaro, her hands bruised and her face burned by the relentless sun of the Arizona desert. Beside her, a medium-sized brown and white mutt wouldn't stop barking and tugging at the rope binding the woman to the cactus. The dog seemed to understand this wasn't normal, and its determination to help caught the attention of a truck driver passing by on the nearby dirt road. "My God, what happened here?" asked Frank Miller, the 50-year-old truck driver, rushing toward the woman. Martha looked at him with tear-filled eyes but couldn't answer right away. Her throat was too dry, and the ropes dug tightly into her wrists. "Please, get me out of here," she finally whispered as the dog kept barking and circling them. Frank quickly worked to untie the ropes, noticing they'd been secured with a complex knot, clearly done by someone who knew what they were doing. Martha's hands were swollen and scratched from the saguaro's thorns. "Who did this to you?" Frank asked, helping her up. Martha swayed, leaning on the trucker's strong arm. The dog, sensing she was being helped, stopped barking and cautiously approached, as if making sure she was really safe. It was my own grandson," Martha answered, her words coming out like a lament lost in the hot desert wind. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story." Frank was stunned by her answer. How could a grandson do something so cruel to his own grandmother? He helped Martha walk to his truck, where he immediately offered her a bottle of fresh water. "Take it slow, Miss Martha," he said, watching as she drank like she hadn't had water in days. "We need to call the police right now." "No," Martha exclaimed with surprising force. "Please don't call the police, not yet." The dog jumped into the truck bed and lay down beside Martha, as if protecting her. Frank noticed the animal wore a simple collar, but no tags. "Is this dog yours?" he asked. "I don't know where he came from," Martha replied, stroking the dog's head. "But he saved me. If it weren't for him, no one would have found me here." Martha explained she lived on a small property about 15 kilometers away, where she raised goats and chickens. 3 days earlier, her 32-year-old grandson Kevin had shown up at her house with 2 men she'd never seen before. "They wanted me to sign some papers," Martha said as Frank drove toward her property. "They said it was for my own good, that I was getting too old to manage the land alone." "And did you sign?" Frank asked. "I refused. That land has been in my family for 4 generations. My late husband, Anthony, worked his whole life to pay it off. I won't just hand it over for free because I'm getting older." The dog lifted its head at the distress in Martha's voice, as if understanding she was reliving something painful. Frank realized this was more complicated than he'd first thought. He'd grown up in a rural family, and knew land disputes were common. But he never imagined a grandson would go so far as to tie his own grandmother to a cactus in the desert. "So they forced you out here?" asked Frank, feeling anger rise in his chest. "Kevin said we were going for a walk, that he wanted to show me a beautiful place. I trusted him," replied Martha, her voice trembling. "When we got here, the 2 men held me while Kevin tied me to the saguaro. He said I'd stay here until I agreed to sign the papers." Martha's property appeared on the horizon. It was a simple house with exposed brick, surrounded by a large plot of land where a few goats grazed freely. There was also a small corral and a chicken coop in the back. When the truck stopped in front of the house, Martha noticed the door was open. That worried her even more because she always locked everything before leaving. "Looks like someone's inside," observed Frank, seeing movement through the window. The dog jumped from the truck bed and ran toward the house, barking again. This time, though, its bark sounded different, more aggressive. "Grandma Martha!" a woman's voice called from inside the house. "Grandma Martha, where are you?" Martha immediately recognized the voice of her granddaughter, Ashley, 25 years old, the daughter of her late daughter, Catherine. Ashley was a teacher at the public school in the neighboring town and had always been very close to her grandmother. "I'm here, sweetheart," Martha replied, rushing into the house. Ashley ran out and hugged her grandmother tightly, crying. She was with her husband, Brandon, a 28-year-old mechanic who had always treated Martha with kindness and respect. "Grandma, where were you?" "We've been looking for 3 days," said Ashley, still holding Martha. Kevin said, "You'd gone to visit a cousin in Riverdale, but when I called Aunt Rose, she said you weren't there." Martha looked around and noticed several pieces of furniture had been disturbed. Drawers were open, and papers scattered on the floor suggested someone had ransacked the house looking for something specific. "They were here, searching for the property documents," Martha said, pointing at the mess. "Kevin and those 2 men with him." Brandon stepped forward with a worried expression. He had always been suspicious of Kevin's intentions, especially after the young man started visiting Martha's house more frequently in recent months. "Miss Martha, what exactly happened?" asked Brandon. "Kevin came here yesterday, saying I'd agreed to sell the property to some investors from New York. Frank, who had stayed back to give the family privacy, approached and introduced himself. He explained how he found Martha tied to the saguaro and how the dog had helped save her. This dog came out of nowhere," said Frank, pointing at the animal now lying in the shade of the porch. "Without him, I never would have stopped to see what was happening." Ashley petted the dog and noticed it seemed well fed and cared for, despite having no obvious owner. The dog responded positively to her touch, wagging its tail and licking her hand. "Kevin said you two were going for a walk," Brandon said. "He seemed really excited, said he wanted to spend more time with his grandma. We never imagined it could be a lie." Martha sat in her favorite chair in the living room, still trying to process everything that had happened. The dog came over and lay at her feet as if wanting to protect her. "I don't understand," Martha said, shaking her head. "Kevin is Catherine's son, my youngest daughter. He grew up playing in this house. How could he want to hurt me?" Ashley explained. That in recent months, she'd noticed Kevin was having money troubles. He'd lost his job at the shoe factory and was struggling to pay the bills for his apartment in town. "But that doesn't justify what he did to you," said Ashley, hugging her grandmother again. "We'll have to call the police." "I already said I don't want to involve the police," Martha replied firmly. "Kevin is my grandson. There must be an explanation for all this." Brandon and Frank exchanged worried glances. They knew Martha was a kind-hearted woman, but they also sensed her kindness might be putting her in danger. "Miss Martha," Frank said respectfully, "those men who were with your grandson might come back. You can't stay here alone." The dog suddenly lifted its head and began to growl softly, staring toward the road. Moments later, they heard the sound of a car approaching. Ashley ran to the window and saw a black sedan stopping in front of the property gate. 2 men got out, the same ones Martha had described. They seemed to be searching for something or someone. "It's them," Martha whispered, hiding behind the curtain. "The men who were with Kevin." Brandon grabbed a piece of wood leaning against the wall, ready to defend the family if needed. Frank also positioned himself strategically, watching the men's movements. The dog started barking loudly, running toward the gate. Its stance was clearly defensive, and its bark seemed like a warning for the strangers not to come closer. "We know you're in there, Ms. Martha," shouted one of the men, a tall, skinny fellow with black hair. "We just want to talk." "Talk?" Ashley muttered indignantly. "After leaving my grandmother tied up in the desert?" The second man, shorter with a protruding belly, tried to open the gate, but the dog lunged at him, growling threateningly. The man quickly backed away. "That dog wasn't here before," the tall man remarked to his partner. "Where did it come from?" Martha watched everything through the curtain's gap, trying to understand what those men really wanted with her property. The land was valuable, but not enough to justify such persistence. Frank moved to the back window and saw another car parked on the side road, a little farther away. It seemed the men had backup, making the situation even more dangerous. "Ms. Martha," Frank said quietly, "I don't think these men will give up easily. Maybe we should leave and get help in town." "This is my home," Martha replied firmly. "I won't run from criminals." The dog kept barking and running back and forth across the yard, as if patrolling the territory. Its presence clearly unsettled the 2 men, who seemed unsure how to proceed. Ashley checked her phone and saw no signal. It was common in this rural area to have poor coverage, especially during the dry season. "I'll go to town for help," Brandon said, heading for the back door. "There's a sheriff's office 20 miles from here." "No," Martha exclaimed. "If you leave, they might come in and do something to us." The standoff lasted nearly an hour. The men stayed outside, sometimes trying to talk to Martha through the gate, other times just waiting. The dog refused to leave the entrance, staying vigilant. Then a third car arrived. This one, however, was different, an older model, and out stepped Kevin, Martha's grandson. "Grandma Martha," Kevin called, waving as if nothing had happened. "Are you okay? We've been looking everywhere." Martha felt a mix of anger and sadness seeing her grandson. On one hand, he was the son of her beloved Catherine. On the other, he was the one who had left her tied up in the desert to fend for herself. "Kevin's here," Ashley announced, watching from the window, "and he's talking to those two men." Frank observed the interaction between the three men and noticed they seemed to be arguing. Kevin was gesturing a lot, and the other two men looked upset about something. "Seems like they don't agree on something," Frank commented. The mutt had stopped barking when Kevin arrived, but kept watching every movement closely. It was as if he could sense the tension in the air. Kevin broke away from the two men and walked toward the house. He looked nervous, constantly glancing back, as if afraid the men might do something. "Grandma Martha, I know you're in there," said Kevin, stopping in front of the door. "Please let me explain what happened." Martha hesitated for a moment. Part of her wanted to hear what her grandson had to say. Another part knew she couldn't trust him after what had happened. "Don't open that door," Brandon whispered. "It could be a trap." "Grandma, I made a terrible mistake," Kevin continued. His voice choked. "Those men threatened me. They said they'd hurt you if I didn't help them." Ashley looked at Martha, seeing the doubt in her grandmother's eyes. Knowing Martha's kind heart, she could tell she was moved by her grandson's words. "They said they knew my routine, where I lived, where I worked," Kevin went on. "I was afraid they'd do something worse if I didn't cooperate." The mutt approached the door, sniffing. He seemed to be trying to figure out if Kevin was a real threat or not. "But why do they want your grandmother's property?" Ashley asked through the door, still not opening it. "They didn't tell me everything," Kevin replied. "Just that the land is worth way more than we think. There's something here they really want." Frank moved closer to Martha and whispered, "Ms. Martha, even if he's telling the truth about the threats, it doesn't excuse what he did to you." Martha knew Frank was right, but she had also known her grandson since he was little. Kevin had always been a fearful boy, easily influenced by others. "Kevin," Martha finally said, still not opening the door, "if you want my trust back, you need to tell me everything. Who are these men and what do they really want?" "I don't know much, Grandma," Kevin answered. "They approached me 2 months ago, said they knew I was in financial trouble and could help me. All I had to do was convince you to sell the property." "And when I refused?" Martha asked. Kevin stayed silent for a long moment. The two men were still waiting by their cars, watching the whole conversation. "They were furious," Kevin admitted finally. "Said if I couldn't get it done one way, I'd have to do it another. That's when they came up with the idea of leaving you in the desert until you agreed to sign the papers." Brandon shook his head in disapproval. It was hard to believe someone could be so cruel to their own family, even under threat. "Grandma, I never wanted you to go through that," Kevin continued, and his voice did sound full of regret. "I thought it would just be for a few hours that you'd end up agreeing to sign." "A few hours?" Ashley exclaimed, outraged. "You left our grandmother tied up in the scorching sun, no water, no food. She could have gotten sick." The mutt started pacing in circles, as if agitated by the argument. Martha noticed the animal seemed to be reacting to the emotional stress everyone was feeling. "I know I did something terrible," Kevin said, "but now they're really threatening me. They said if I don't bring the signed papers by tomorrow, they'll do something worse." "Worse how?" Frank asked, stepping closer to the door. "They know where Ashley works," replied Kevin. "They know where Brandon has his workshop. They said accidents can happen to anyone." This revelation left everyone in silence. The situation had become much more serious than they initially imagined. Ashley felt a chill in her stomach as she realized she was being watched. As a teacher, she was in daily contact with children. The idea that dangerous men knew her routine terrified her. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, back to the story. Brandon was also worried. His workshop was on a secluded street, in town, and he often worked alone late into the night. It would be easy for someone to approach unseen. "Grandma Martha," said Kevin, knocking lightly on the door. "Please let me in. We need to talk properly about this. Maybe we can find a solution. That doesn't involve handing over the property." Martha looked at Frank, Ashley, and Brandon, seeking guidance. They all seemed torn between compassion for the young man and justifiable suspicion. "If he comes in, I'll keep watch," said Frank. "Any suspicious move and I'll step in." Brandon nodded in agreement, picking up the piece of wood he'd set down earlier. Martha took a deep breath and walked to the door. Before opening it, though, she glanced at the dog. The animal sat watching her intently, as if waiting for her decision. "All right, Kevin," said Martha, slowly unlocking the door. "But you come in alone. Those two men stay outside." Kevin motioned to the two men, signaling for them to wait. They didn't seem happy with the decision, but remained by the cars. When Kevin entered the house, the dog stood up and positioned itself between him and Martha, watching the young man's every move. It was remarkable how the animal seemed to understand it needed to protect the elderly woman. Kevin looked thinner than the last time Martha had seen him. His clothes were wrinkled, and he had deep bags under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept well in days. "Sit down, Kevin," said Martha, pointing to the couch, "and tell me everything from the beginning. Who are these men?" Kevin perched on the edge of the sofa, clearly uncomfortable. The dog lay at Martha's feet but kept its eyes fixed on him. "They're called Jackson and Joey," Kevin began. "Jackson's the taller one, and Joey's the shorter one. They came to me 2 months ago when I was drinking at Joe's bar near my place." "How did they know you were in financial trouble?" asked Ashley. "That's what I don't understand either," admitted Kevin. "They knew details about my life I'd never told anyone. They knew I'd lost my job, that I owed 3 months' rent, that the landlord was threatening to kick me out." Brandon and Frank exchanged worried glances. This suggested the men had access to privileged information, perhaps through contacts at the bank or other institutions. "And what exactly did they propose?" Martha pressed. "At first it seemed simple," Kevin explained. "They said they represented a group of investors interested in buying rural properties in the area. They offered me $50,000 to convince you to sell for $200,000. Martha nearly choked hearing the figures. Her property was valuable, but she never imagined it could be worth that much. $200,000, she repeated. "Why would anyone pay so much for this land?" "That's where it gets weird," said Kevin. "When I asked why, they changed the subject. They just said the land's value would skyrocket in the next few years." Frank moved to the window and noticed the two men were talking on the phone. One of them seemed to be taking instructions from someone. "Kevin," said Frank, "do you have any idea who's behind these two? They must be working for someone more important." "I suspected that," replied Kevin. "Several times I heard them mention the boss on the phone, but I never found out who it is." Ashley sat beside her grandmother, gently taking her hand. The situation was growing more complex with each revelation. "Grandma, maybe it's time we seek professional help," said Ashley. "This has gone too far." "No," Kevin exclaimed, standing up abruptly. "You don't understand. If the police get involved, they'll carry out their threats. They made that very clear." The dog growled softly when Kevin stood up suddenly, but calmed down when it saw Martha wasn't in immediate danger. "So what do you suggest?" asked Brandon. "That we just hand over the property to these criminals." "Maybe there's a third option," said Kevin, sitting back down. "I was thinking, what if we found out what they really want? Why is this land so valuable to them?" Martha considered her grandson's suggestion. If they knew the real reason behind the interest in the property, perhaps they could find a way to handle the situation without losing the land. "How do we find that out?" she asked. "I can try to get more information," replied Kevin. "They trust me, or at least they trust that I'm on their side." Frank shook his head disapprovingly. The idea of Kevin staying involved with those men didn't seem safe to him. "That's too dangerous," said Frank. If they find out you're investigating, they might do something worse. Frank's right, Ashley agreed. You've already taken too many risks, Kevin. We don't want you getting hurt too. Kevin was surprised by his cousin's concern. After everything he'd done, he hadn't expected her to still care about his well-being. Ashley, I know I don't deserve your concern, said Kevin, his voice choked. But I need to try to fix what I did. It's the only way to make things right. The dog stood up and walked over to Kevin, sniffing his hands. After a moment it lay down again, seeming to accept the young man's presence. Even the dog is giving me a second chance, Kevin remarked, trying to smile. Martha watched the interaction between her grandson and the animal that had saved her. There was something symbolic about that moment, as if the dog was teaching them about forgiveness and second chances. All right, Kevin, Martha finally said. But you're not doing this alone. We'll come up with a plan together. Brandon moved closer and sat at the kitchen table where Martha usually had her meals. It was a simple, dark wooden piece that had belonged to the family for decades. First, we need to understand more about these investors, said Brandon. Kevin, do you have any way to contact them without raising suspicion? They gave me a phone number, replied Kevin, but it's a number that only receives calls. You can't call back. What about their car? Asked Frank. Did you get the license plate? Kevin shook his head. He explained that in the first meetings, he'd been too nervous to notice those details. Ashley had an idea. As a teacher, she'd taken several security courses and knew small details could make a big difference in situations like this. Kevin, try to remember everything they said about the area, said Ashley. Any comments about other properties, other residents, anything that might give us a clue. Kevin closed his eyes, trying to recall the conversations he'd had with Jackson and Joey. At first it seemed there was nothing relevant, but after a few minutes, he remembered something important. Wait, said Kevin, opening his eyes. In one of the conversations they mentioned, they had already tried to buy Mr. Raymond's property, which is about 3 miles from here. Martha knew Raymond Peterson well, an 80-year-old man who lived alone on a neighboring farm. They occasionally ran into each other in town for shopping. And what happened with the purchase attempt? Asked Martha. From what I understood, Mr. Raymond also refused, replied Kevin. But they didn't push as hard as they're pushing with you. They gave up after a few weeks. This information intrigued Frank. If the investors were really interested in rural properties in the area, why didn't they pursue all of them equally? That means there's something specific about Ms. Martha's property, observed Frank. Something that isn't on Mr. Raymond's land. Brandon stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the backyard and the surrounding land. Martha's property was well kept, but there didn't seem to be anything extraordinary that would justify such interest. Grandma Martha said, Ashley, do you know if there's anything special about this land? A spring, some mineral, anything Grandpa or someone in the family mentioned? Martha thought for a long moment. She had lived on that property for over 50 years. Ever since she married Anthony, she knew every inch of that land. There's the spring in the back, said Martha, pointing toward the west side of the property. But it's nothing unusual. Several properties around here have springs. And Mr. Raymond, does he have a spring? Asked Kevin. Martha shook her head. Raymond's property relied on artesian wells for water. Maybe that's it, said Brandon. With the drought that's been hitting the region these past few years, water has become a very valuable resource. Frank agreed with Brandon's observation. He had seen several conflicts over water during his travels as a truck driver through the Southwest. But even so, said Frank, it wouldn't justify paying $200,000 for a small spring. The dog, which had stayed quiet during the conversation, suddenly lifted its head and began to growl softly. Everyone looked toward the window and saw the 2 men approaching the house. Looks like they got tired of waiting, whispered Ashley. Jackson, the taller man, banged loudly on the door. His patience had clearly run out. Kevin, shouted Jackson. It's been over an hour. What's going on in there? Kevin glanced at Martha and the others, clearly nervous. He knew he had to respond, but wasn't sure what to say. Just a few more minutes, Kevin shouted back. We're almost reaching an agreement. You've got 5 minutes, replied Joey, the shorter man. After that, we're coming in whether you like it or not. The threat left everyone tense. It was clear those men wouldn't tolerate being ignored much longer. Martha stood and walked to the back window. She looked toward the direction of the spring, trying to see if there was something she might have missed all these years. "Anthony always said that part of the property was special," murmured Martha, more to herself than the others. "But I never knew why." Ashley moved closer to her grandmother, intrigued by the comment. Her grandfather Anthony had passed when she was still a child, but she remembered him as a wise and observant man. "What exactly did he say, Grandma?" asked Ashley. "He used to spend hours sitting near the spring," Martha recalled. "He said the water tasted different, purer than usual, and she also talked about the stones around the spring." "What kind of stones?" asked Brandon, stepping closer. "Dark, shiny stones," replied Martha. "Anthony said they were different from the common rocks in the area." Frank, Kevin, and Brandon exchanged meaningful glances. That description could indicate the presence of some valuable mineral. "Ms. Martha," Frank said cautiously, "would you be able to take us to that spring?" "Of course," Martha answered. "But what about those men outside?" The dog walked to the back door, as if understanding they needed to leave that way. Its intelligence kept impressing everyone. "We can leave through the back," Brandon suggested. "They're focused on the front entrance." Kevin hesitated for a moment. He knew he was betraying Jackson and Joey, but he also realized that uncovering the truth was the only way to protect his family. "Let's go," Kevin said, making his decision. "But we need to be quick and quiet." The group left through the back door, following Martha toward the spring. The dog went with them, staying alert for any sign of danger. The walk to the spring took about 15 minutes. The terrain was uneven, with loose rocks and typical desert vegetation. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows that made it easier for them to move unseen. When they reached the spring, everyone was struck by the beauty of the place. Water bubbled up between dark rocks, forming a small stream that ran a few yards before disappearing into the sandy ground. "These are the stones Grandpa Anthony mentioned," Martha said, pointing to the rock formations around the spring. Brandon stepped closer and examined the stones more carefully. He wasn't an expert in mineralogy, but he could see they were truly different from the usual rocks in the area. "These stones have a metallic shine," Brandon observed, "and they're much heavier than they should be." Frank picked up a smaller, loose piece of rock and held it up to the fading sunlight. "The material really did have unusual characteristics. This could be some kind of ore," Frank said. "Maybe iron, maybe something more valuable." Kevin crouched down and scooped up a sample of the spring water. It had a different taste, purer, with a slight metallic tang. "If there's ore here," Kevin said, "that would explain why they want this property so badly." Ashley was photographing the stones with her phone when she noticed something strange. On one of the larger rocks there were marks that looked man-made. "Look at this," Ashley said, pointing to the marks. "It seems like someone's already been here doing some kind of research." The marks were small, circular holes, as if someone had taken samples of the rocks for analysis. That suggested the discovery of the possible ore hadn't been accidental. "Someone already knew about this," Martha murmured, feeling betrayed. "Someone was on my property without my permission." Brandon examined the holes more closely and noticed they seemed freshly made. The edges were still clean, with no signs of erosion or moss growth. "These holes were made just a few weeks ago," Brandon said. "Maybe even a few days." The discovery left everyone even more worried. If someone had collected samples recently, it meant the interest in the property was based on precise information, not just speculation. "Grandma Martha," Ashley said, "do you remember seeing any strangers around here lately?" Martha tried to recall, but in recent months she'd barely left the house due to some health issues. It was possible someone had visited the property without her noticing. "Wait," Kevin said, remembering something important. "Last week when I came to visit Grandma, I saw a man walking around here. He said he was looking for a lost dog." Everyone looked at the dog that had been following them. The animal was drinking water from the spring, seemingly familiar with the place. "Do you think this dog belonged to that man?" asked Frank. "Maybe," replied Kevin, "but the man didn't seem to recognize the dog when he saw it." Martha approached the animal and petted it. The dog responded affectionately but showed no signs of wanting to leave with anyone in particular. "This dog chose to stay here," said Martha, "and he's the one who saved me. Maybe he showed up exactly when I needed him most." The group stayed by the spring for a few more minutes, collecting rock samples and photographing everything that might be relevant. It was important to have physical evidence before deciding how to proceed. As they started heading back to the house, they noticed lights moving toward the residence. Jackson and Joey were clearly searching for them. "They must have realized we're not in the house anymore," whispered Ashley. "We need to get back before they get even angrier," said Kevin, worried about the possible consequences. The group quickened their pace but remained careful not to make noise. The dog led them along the safest path, as if he knew every rock and bush on the property. When they got close to the house, they saw Jackson on the phone, apparently reporting the situation to someone. His expression was one of irritation and concern. "Yes, sir," Jackson was saying. "They're gone." "No, sir. I don't know where they are. We'll search the property." Joey was sweeping the yard with a flashlight, checking for signs of where the group had gone. Luckily, the dry ground didn't show clear footprints. Martha signaled for everyone to stay hidden behind the chicken coop. From there, they could watch the two men's movements without being seen. "The boss isn't going to like this," Joey was telling Jackson. "He said everything had to be settled today." "I know," Jackson replied, putting away his phone, "but the old lady is more stubborn than we thought, and now she's got help." This conversation confirmed what the group already suspected. There was indeed someone more important behind the whole operation. Frank whispered to Martha, "Miss Martha, they mentioned a boss. That means someone's coordinating all this." Martha nodded, feeling increasingly worried about the complexity of the situation. What had started as a simple refusal to sell the property was turning into something much bigger. The dog grew restless, sniffing the air as if sensing danger. His unease put everyone on high alert. Suddenly, they heard the sound of more cars approaching. 3 vehicles stopped in front of the property and several men stepped out. "Oh my God," whispered Ashley. "How many men did they bring?" Kevin felt panic rising inside him. The situation had escalated far beyond what he'd imagined possible. "I've never seen these other men before," said Kevin, trembling. "Jackson and Joey never mentioned having this much backup." Brandon quickly counted and saw at least 8 men on the property now, all seemingly searching for something or someone. "We need to get out of here," said Brandon. "We can't take on this many people." "But where do we go?" asked Martha. "This is my home. I can't just run away." Frank noticed the men were organizing a systematic search of the property. It was only a matter of time before they were found. "Miss Martha," said Frank, "sometimes a strategic retreat is the best option. We can come back when we have more help." The dog began moving toward the farthest part of the property, as if trying to lead the group to a safe place. Everyone decided to follow the animal. During their escape, they could hear the men shouting instructions to each other. It was clear they were running a well-coordinated operation. "Search the whole house," yelled a voice that wasn't Jackson's or Joey's. They can't have gone far." "Check the surroundings," shouted another voice, "and look for footprints." The group managed to reach the back road behind the property without being detected. There, they had to make an important decision about what to do next. "We have to go to town," said Ashley. "Get official help." "But Kevin said they threatened to hurt you if the police got involved," Martha reminded them. "With so many men after us now," Frank said, "we don't have a choice. This is beyond what we can handle on our own." Kevin reluctantly agreed. He knew the threats were real, but he also saw the situation had grown too big to control. "Let's go to the sheriff's office," Kevin said. "But first we need a safe place to spend the night." Brandon suggested they go to his mother's house in the next town over. It was a place where they likely wouldn't be found, at least not right away. The group walked along the dirt road for about 2 kilometers until they reached the main road. There, Frank managed to radio another trucker, who agreed to pick them up. While they waited, Martha watched the dog still by her side. The animal seemed to understand they were running from danger and stayed alert. "This dog is special," Martha said, petting him. "It's like he showed up exactly when we needed him most." "Maybe he came to help us uncover the truth about your property," Ashley said. If it weren't for him, you'd still be tied to that saguaro. When the rescue truck arrived, everyone quickly climbed in. The driver, a friend of Frank's named Peter, asked no questions. He just drove toward town as requested. During the ride, Martha looked out the window toward her property, growing more distant by the minute. It was the first time in decades she'd spend a night away from home. "Don't worry, Grandma," Ashley said, holding her hand. "We'll figure this out and you'll go home safe." The dog lay in Martha's lap as if to comfort her. His presence brought a sense of protection and hope amid all the uncertainty. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. When they arrived at Brandon's mother's house, Miss Francis, a 65-year-old woman, welcomed them with typical small-town hospitality. Without asking too many questions, she made coffee and a simple dinner for everyone. "You all look like you've been through a lot," Miss Francis said, noticing their dirty clothes and tired expressions. Brandon briefly explained the situation, leaving out the most dangerous details to avoid worrying his mother. She offered her home as shelter for as long as they needed. After dinner, the group gathered in the living room to plan their next steps. The dog lay at Martha's feet, staying watchful even inside the house. "Tomorrow morning we'll go to the sheriff's office," Frank said. "We'll take the rock samples and tell them everything we've found." "What if the sheriff doesn't believe us?" Kevin asked, still worried about the consequences. "We have proof," Ashley said, showing the photos she'd taken, "and we have witnesses. Besides, Frank can confirm how he found Grandma tied to the saguaro." Martha was quiet, lost in thought. She was trying to process everything that had happened in the last few hours and understand how her peaceful life had turned into such a complicated situation. "Grandma," Ashley said gently, "what are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking about your grandfather Anthony," Martha replied. "He always said that property held secrets. I never imagined he was right in such a literal way." Ms. Francis brought blankets and pillows so everyone could rest. The house was small but cozy, offering the sense of safety they all needed at that moment. Before going to sleep, Kevin approached Martha. He knew he needed to formally apologize for what he'd done, no matter the circumstances that had led him to act that way. "Grandma Martha," Kevin said, his eyes brimming with tears, "I know what I did was unforgivable. It doesn't matter that they threatened me. I should have found another way." Martha looked at her grandson for a long moment. She could see genuine remorse in his eyes, but she also knew trust would take time to rebuild. "Kevin," Martha finally said, "I forgive you because you're Catherine's son. But forgiving doesn't mean I can forget. You'll have to prove you've changed." "I will," Kevin promised. "I'll do everything in my power to fix this." The mutt walked up to Kevin and nudged his hand with its snout, as if offering a second chance too. The gesture moved everyone present. During the night, Martha struggled to sleep. She was worried about her property and the animals she'd left behind. The goats and chickens depended on her for food and care. Around 3 in the morning, the dog grew restless. It paced back and forth, occasionally stopping to look out the window. Frank, who was sleeping on the living room couch, noticed the animal's agitation and got up to check for trouble. Through the window, Frank saw an unfamiliar car parked at the street corner. He couldn't clearly see who was inside, but the vehicle had been there longer than normal. Frank quietly woke Brandon and pointed at the car. The two men watched for a few minutes and realized someone was definitely watching the house. "They found us," Brandon whispered. "How did they figure out where we were?" "Kevin might have mentioned something about my family," Frank replied. "Or maybe they have other ways to track us." The two men decided to wake the rest of the group. It was important everyone knew they weren't completely safe, even there. When Martha learned they were being watched, she grew even more distressed. The feeling of constantly being in danger was starting to take a toll on her emotionally. "We can't stay here," Ashley said. "It's not fair to put Miss Francis at risk." Ms. Francis, who had woken up from the commotion, insisted they stay. She said she wasn't afraid of bad men and knew how to defend herself. "Ms. Francis," Frank said respectfully, "we appreciate your courage, but these people are dangerous. We don't want you getting hurt because of us." The group decided to leave through the back of the house and find another place to hide until dawn. The dog went with them, once again acting as their guide and protector. They walked through the deserted streets of the small town, searching for a safe spot where they could wait until the sheriff's office opened. The early morning was cold and everyone was tired and worried. Brandon remembered there was a church in the town center that usually stayed open at night for people needing shelter. He suggested they go there. St. Francis Church was an old, but well-maintained building. When they arrived, they found the doors open and some candles lit at the main altar. Father Joseph, a 60-year-old man who often held night vigils, welcomed them without asking questions. He offered water and some cookies he had in the sacristy. "You all seem to be going through some difficulties," Father Joseph said kindly. "Would you like to talk about it?" Martha, who had always been a religious person, felt comfortable enough to share part of their story with the priest. She explained the pressure to sell the property and the threats they had been receiving. Father Joseph listened carefully, occasionally asking questions to clarify certain points. When Martha finished speaking, he remained thoughtful for a few moments. "Martha," the priest said, "I've known you for many years. I know you're an honest and hard-working person. If you say you're being threatened, I believe you." "Thank you, Father," Martha replied, feeling slightly relieved to have the support of someone respected in the community. "But I also know a few things that might be useful to you." "Father," Joseph continued, "over the past few months, several people have come to me with similar stories. Pressure to sell land, unusually high offers, threats when they refused." This revelation surprised everyone. If others were going through the same situation, it meant there was a pattern, a larger operation at work. "How many people have come to you?" Frank asked. "At least 5 different families," the priest answered, "all with rural properties in the area, all receiving offers to sell land worth far more than market price." "Did any of them sell?" Ashley questioned. "Yes," Father Joseph said sadly. "The Smith family, who had a farm near the river, they sold 3 weeks ago and moved to Chicago." Brandon remembered the Smiths. They were simple people who lived off cattle raising and subsistence, farming. It was strange to imagine they had enough money to move to a big city. "Father," Kevin said, "do you know why they sold? Were they threatened too?" "Not exactly," Father Joseph replied. "They told me they received an offer they couldn't refuse. A lot of money, more than they ever imagined having." "But if the offer was so good," Martha questioned, "why did they seem sad when they said goodbye?" The priest confirmed that the Smiths didn't seem happy about the move, despite the money. They had lived in that region for generations, and leaving everything behind had been painful. "There's something else," the priest said, lowering his voice. "After they sold, heavy machinery appeared on the property. Excavators, trucks, equipment we've never seen around here before." This information confirmed the group's suspicions about mining activities. Whoever was behind the purchases had enough resources to invest in expensive equipment. "Father," Frank said, "have you noticed any pattern in the properties being targeted? Any common characteristics?" Father Joseph thought for a moment, trying to recall the details each family had shared with him. "Now that you mention it," the priest said, "all the properties are in the same region, an area that's always been known for having abundant water, even during the worst droughts. So it's not just about one specific property," Brandon concluded. "It's about an entire region." The dog, which had been quiet throughout the conversation, began to grow restless again. It walked toward the church door, as if sensing danger approaching. Frank moved closer to one of the windows and saw 2 cars parked in the square in front of the church. Even in the darkness, she could make out the silhouettes of people watching the building. "They found us again," Frank whispered to the group. Father Joseph noticed the tension and stepped closer to understand what was happening. When Frank explained about the cars, the priest grew concerned but remained determined to help. "You can leave through the sacristy," said Father Joseph. "There's a door that leads to the church's backyard. From there you can reach the back street without being seen." "Father," Martha said, "we don't want to bring trouble to the church." "Martha," the priest replied, "helping people in need is exactly what the church is for. Go in peace and eat. May God protect you." The group headed to the sacristy, following the priest's instructions. The dog went with them, but seemed hesitant to leave the safety of the church. When they reached the back door, Father Joseph made sure to give them a few more directions before they left. "If you need help again, go to Sheriff Matthews," he said. "He's an honest and trustworthy man. Tell him I sent you." "Thank you for everything, Father," Martha said, hugging the man who had helped them when they needed it most. The group slipped through the church's backyard and managed to reach the back street undetected. From there, they hurried toward the town center, where the sheriff's office was located. It was nearly 5 in the morning when they arrived. The building was still closed, but an officer on duty let them in after they explained it was an emergency. The officer, Sergeant Davis, listened to a brief summary of their story and said Sheriff Matthews would arrive at 7. He offered to let them wait inside where they'd be safe. While they waited, Martha took the time to mentally organize everything that had happened. It was important that when she told the sheriff, all the details would be clear and consistent. Ashley helped her grandmother write a list of every major event, from the first time Kevin was approached by the men to the present moment. It was a way to make sure nothing important was forgotten. Kevin also wrote down his version of events, including every detail he remembered about Jackson, Joey, and the instructions he'd been given. He knew his cooperation would be crucial in resolving the situation. Frank prepared a statement about how he had found Martha tied to the saguaro, with detailed descriptions of the location and her condition. Brandon organized the photos Ashley had taken of the spring and the rocks, ready to explain his suspicions about possible illegal mining activity. When Sheriff Matthews arrived at 7 sharp, he found the group organized and prepared to give a full account of what had happened. The dog lay at Martha's feet as always. Sheriff Matthews was a man in his 50s, experienced in handling rural crimes. He had worked in other parts of the Southwest and was familiar with conflicts over land and natural resources. "Good morning," the sheriff said, introducing himself. "Sergeant Davis gave me a summary of the situation. Let's talk calmly and figure out exactly what's going on." Martha was the first to speak, starting from the beginning when Kevin had shown up at her house with the 2 men. She described in detail how she was taken to the desert and tied to the saguaro. The sheriff asked several specific questions about the men, requesting detailed physical descriptions and any distinguishing features that could help identify them. When Martha mentioned the dog that had saved her, the sheriff studied the animal with interest. It was unusual for a stray to appear at just the right moment to help someone in danger. "Does this dog have any identification?" the sheriff asked. "There isn't any," Martha replied, "but he seems to know my property. He knew exactly where the spring was when we went there." Kevin told his part of the story, admitting his involvement and explaining the threats he'd received. He provided all the information he had about Jackson and Joey. The sheriff took detailed notes about the names, physical descriptions, and phone numbers Kevin had. He also asked about the cars the men used. Frank described how he'd found Martha and explained the condition she was in. He emphasized the seriousness of the situation and how hard it would be for an elderly person to survive long in the desert. Ashley showed the photographs of the spring and the rocks, explaining the group's suspicions about possible mining activity. The sheriff examined the images with growing interest. "These marks on the rocks really do look like they were made for sample collection," the sheriff said. "I'll send these photos to a mineralogy specialist we know." Brandon added information about the heavy equipment that had been seen on the Smith family's property as reported by Father Joseph. Sheriff Matthews was particularly interested in the information about other families who had been pressured to sell their land. This suggested a pattern that went beyond an isolated incident. "I'll get in touch with Father Joseph," the sheriff said. "I need to speak with these other families to understand the scope of the problem." The sheriff explained that illegal mining investigations were complex and usually involved multiple authorities. He promised to contact environmental agencies and federal police if necessary. "In the meantime," the sheriff said, "you all need a safe place to stay. It's not wise to return to the property until we resolve this situation." Martha was distressed at the thought of not being able to go home, especially because she worried about her animals. The sheriff promised to send a team to check on the property and care for the animals. "But I need to be there," Martha insisted. "The goats need milking, the chickens need feeding. They depend on me." The sheriff understood Martha's concern, but explained that her safety was the priority. He suggested that Brandon, who knew about animals, accompany the officers to the property. As they discussed the details, Sergeant Davis entered the room with a worried expression. He whispered something in the sheriff's ear, who immediately became alert. "Looks like we've got company outside," the sheriff said. "2 cars with people watching the station. Probably the same men you described." This revelation made everyone tense. It was astonishing how bold these men were, even surveilling a police station. Sheriff Matthews, however, saw it as an opportunity. If the men were there, they could be identified and possibly detained for questioning. "I'll organize an operation to approach these individuals," the sheriff said. "Meanwhile, you all stay inside where it's safe." The dog, as if sensing the tension in the air, stood up and began pacing in circles. His agitation mirrored the nervousness everyone felt. Martha petted the animal, trying to calm him. It was remarkable how that dog had become a source of comfort for her amid all the chaos. "Sheriff," Martha said, "this dog showed up right when I needed him most. Do you think someone sent him to help me?" The sheriff smiled at Martha's innocent question. He'd seen many coincidences in his career, but he also knew life sometimes held inexplicable surprises. "Ms. Martha," the sheriff said, "maybe this dog appeared at just the right time because the world still has people, or animals, who care about helping others." While the sheriff organized the operation to approach the men watching the station, the group anxiously awaited the results. Sergeant Davis coordinated with other officers in the area to discreetly surround the suspicious cars. It was important to act carefully so as not to alert the men about the operation. Through the station window, the group could see subtle police movement in the surrounding streets. It was reassuring to know they finally had official support to handle the situation. "I hope they managed to arrest those men," said Kevin. "Maybe then I can sleep peacefully again." "Kevin," said Ashley, "you'll need time to regain everyone's trust. What you did was very serious." "I know," Kevin replied, lowering his head, "but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right." The dog approached Kevin again, just as it had the night before. It was as if the animal understood the young man was remorseful and deserved a second chance. An hour later, Sheriff Matthews returned with news. The operation had been successful. Jackson and Joey had been detained for questioning, along with 2 other men who were with them. "We managed to seize documents, cell phones, and other materials that could be important for the investigation," said the sheriff. "Did they say anything?" asked Frank. "Not yet," replied the sheriff, "but we found interesting things in their cars. Maps of the area with several properties marked, including yours, Ms. Martha. This discovery confirmed there was indeed an organized operation targeting multiple properties in the area." Martha felt relieved to know her intuition had been correct. The sheriff showed the group copies of the seized maps. Besides Martha's property, at least 15 others were marked, all in the same region. "Some of these properties have already been sold," noted Ashley, comparing the maps to what Father Joseph had told them. "Exactly," said the sheriff. "And now we'll investigate what's happening on those lands that have already been purchased." Brandon studied the maps and noticed all the marked properties were along the same underground watercourse that fed the spring on Martha's land. "Sheriff," said Brandon, "these properties have something in common. They all sit on the same aquifer. If mining is happening, water would be essential for the process." The sheriff praised Brandon's observation. That could explain why specifically those properties were valuable to the mysterious investors. "I'll contact the Water Resources Department," said the sheriff. "They can help us understand what kind of activity is being carried out in the area." While the sheriff organized the next steps of the investigation, Martha asked if it would be possible to visit her property to check on the animals. "I can arrange a police escort," said the sheriff, "but only for a quick visit. It's not safe to stay there for long." Brandon offered to accompany Martha to the property. He knew about animals and could help with any issues they found. The dog grew very excited when it realized they were going back to the property. It was as if he couldn't wait to return to the place that had become his home. The trip to the property was made in a 2-car police convoy. The sheriff wanted to ensure any threat was neutralized before it became dangerous. When they arrived, At Martha's property, they found clear signs the place had been searched. Drawers left open, furniture out of place, documents scattered on the floor. They were looking for something specific, observed the sheriff, examining the mess in the house. Martha was distressed to see her home in such a state. Decades of memories and personal belongings had been disturbed by strangers with dubious intentions. The dog ran straight to the backyard where Martha's animals were visibly stressed. The goats were bleating constantly and the chickens seemed agitated. At least they didn't harm the animals, said Brandon, checking on them. Firsultin bilam, Andusa, but they're thirsty and hungry. Martha immediately busied herself with caring for her animals. It was comforting to return to her familiar routine, even if only temporarily. While Martha and Brandon tended to the animals, the sheriff and other officers inspected the entire property, searching for evidence or signs of suspicious activity. Near the spring, they found more signs that someone had collected samples. There were even measuring tools left behind. There's definitely mineral research happening here, said the sheriff, photographing the equipment, and without the owner's permission. He explained that mining exploration on private property without consent was a crime, giving them legal grounds to prosecute those involved. After 2 hours on the property, the sheriff insisted it was time to leave. Staying too long in a place that was being watched wasn't wise. Martha said a temporary goodbye to her animals with sadness. Brandon promised to return the next day to care for them again. The dog hesitated between going with Martha or staying behind, but finally decided to follow her, as if understanding she needed his protection more. Back at the station, the sheriff reported that the interrogations with Jackson and Joey were making progress. Under pressure, they had begun revealing information about their employers. They confirmed they work for a mining company, said the sheriff, a company that doesn't have authorization to operate in this region. And who owns this company? Asked Kevin. We're still investigating, replied the sheriff, but we have a few names and we'll check each one. He explained that illegal mining cases often involved shell companies and people with fake identities. The investigation would be complex and take time. In the meantime, said the sheriff, you all need to stay in a safe location. We don't know how many people are involved in this operation. Martha was eager to return home, but understood her safety was the priority. She asked if there was any estimate for when the situation would be resolved. It depends on how much information we can get from the men we arrested, replied the sheriff, and also on whether we can locate those responsible for the operation. The dog seemed to sense Martha's sadness. He approached and rested his head on her lap, offering the silent comfort only animals can give. This dog has been a guardian angel to me, said Martha, stroking him. I don't know what would have happened if he hadn't shown up. Ashley suggested they find a more comfortable place for Martha to stay during the investigation. The idea of living indefinitely at Ms. Francis's house or the station wasn't ideal. I have a suggestion, said the sheriff. There's a rest home in the neighboring town that sometimes offers temporary lodging for people in situations like this. Martha initially resisted the idea. The term rest home made her feel like she was incapable of taking care of herself. It's not a nursing home, Ms. Martha, explained the sheriff. It's more like a guest house that provides special care for seniors. Ashley supported the suggestion, explaining that it would be a safe and comfortable environment where Martha could rest while the situation was resolved. Brandon offered to visit Martha daily and take care of the animals on the property. This reassured Martha, who was very concerned about the well-being of her pets. After discussing several options, the group decided that Martha would stay at the retirement home temporarily. Kevin, Ashley, and Brandon would take turns visiting her and keeping her informed about the progress of the investigation. As they prepared to leave the sheriff's office, the sheriff received an important call. It was from the mineralogy expert who had analyzed the photos of the stones from the spring. Doctor, could you repeat that? Said the sheriff, taking notes. Yes, I understand. Thank you very much for the quick response. When the call ended, the sheriff turned to the group with a serious expression. The news he had received completely changed the scope of the case. The stones from the spring contain coltan, said the sheriff. It's a very valuable mineral used in making electronic components. Coltan? Asked Brandon. I've never heard of it, The sheriff explained that coltan was a rare and highly prized mineral internationally. Its presence on Martha's property explained the investors' intense interest. "With this discovery," said the sheriff, "we now understand why they were willing to pay so much for the land. A coltan deposit could be worth millions." This revelation left everyone stunned. Martha had lived her entire life on top of a fortune without knowing it. "But does that mean I'm rich?" asked Martha, still trying to process the information. "Potentially, yes," replied the sheriff. "But first, we need to ensure the mining is done legally and with your permission." The sheriff explained that detailed, technical studies would be needed to determine the quantity and quality of the mineral on the property. "Ms. Martha," said the sheriff, "with this discovery, your safety becomes even more important. There's a lot of money at stake now." Kevin was particularly shaken by the news. He realized he had helped criminals try to steal a fortune from his own grandmother. "Grandma," said Kevin, his voice trembling, "I almost handed a fortune to those criminals. How can I ever forgive myself?" "Kevin," replied Martha, "what matters now is that we've uncovered the truth. And you helped us get here." The dog seemed to sense the emotion in the air. He stood up and walked among the group members, as if trying to unite the family. With the discovery of coltan, the sheriff explained that the case would be transferred to higher authorities. Crimes involving illegal mining of valuable materials fell under federal jurisdiction. "Is that good or bad for us?" asked Ashley. "It's good," replied the sheriff. "It means we'll have more resources to investigate and more protection for Ms. Martha." The sheriff arranged for Martha to be taken to the retirement home under police escort. It was important to keep her location secret until everyone involved in the illegal operation was identified and arrested. During the drive to the retirement home, Martha looked out the window at the familiar landscape of her region. It was strange to think that beneath that seemingly ordinary land lay a mineral treasure. "Grandma," said Ashley, sitting beside her, in the car, "have you thought about what you'll do if it's really confirmed that there's a fortune on your property?" Martha thought for a moment. She had lived a simple life and had never desired wealth. The idea of having so much money left her more worried than excited. "If it's true," said Martha, "I want to make sure my family is taken care of, and maybe help others in the community too." The dog lay at Martha's feet, as always. Despite all the changes and discoveries, he remained a comforting constant in her life. Peaceful Haven was a welcoming retirement home, with well-kept gardens and a tranquil atmosphere. The director, Ms. Lucy, greeted Martha with special warmth. "Mrs. Wilson," Ms. Lucy said, "Sheriff Matthews explained your situation to me. Rest, assured you'll be safe and well cared for here." Martha was settled into a comfortable room with a view of the garden. The dog was allowed to stay with her, which put her much more at ease. Ashley and Brandon promised to visit Martha every day and keep her updated on the investigation's progress. Kevin also wanted to visit, but Martha asked for some time to process everything that had happened. On her first night at the retirement home, Martha struggled to sleep. Her mind was full of thoughts about how much her life had changed in such a short time. The dog seemed to understand her emotional state. He lay on the bed beside her, offering his warmth and comforting presence. "What a strange week this has been," Martha said, stroking the animal. "If someone told me this story, I wouldn't believe it." The next day, Martha woke with an odd feeling. Though she was in a safe and comfortable place, she missed her routine, her home, her animals. During breakfast, she chatted with other residents. Many had interesting stories, and she felt a little less alone. Ms. Caroline, an 80-year-old woman staying temporarily at the home, was particularly interested in Martha's story. "My dear," Ms. Caroline said, "at my age I've seen it all. But your story is truly extraordinary." Martha shared some details about her situation, carefully, omitting sensitive information that could compromise the investigation. The dog adjusted quickly to the retirement home. He seemed to enjoy the attention from the other residents and staff. Around 10 in the morning, Ashley arrived to visit Martha. She brought updates on the investigation and the animals on the property. "Grandma, Brandon took care of your animals this morning," Ashley said. "They're all fine and there's news about the investigation." "What kind of news?" Martha asked, eager to hear. "The sheriff got more information from the men he arrested," Ashley explained. They revealed the name of the company they work for. It's called Southwest Mining Corp., but preliminary investigations show it's a shell company registered with fake documents. But did they track down who's behind the company? Martha asked. They're still investigating, Ashley replied, but it looks like influential people are involved. The sheriff said the case is getting more complicated than they thought. This news worried Martha. If powerful people were involved, it meant the fight to protect her property would be harder than she'd imagined. The dog noticed the shift in her mood and moved closer, offering his silent support as he always did. Ashley, Martha said, I'm starting to think maybe it'd be easier to just sell the property. All this conflict is exhausting me. Grandma, don't say that, Ashley exclaimed. That land has been in our family for generations, and now we know it could be worth a fortune. We can't give up now. Martha knew Ashley was right, but she was also worried about the family's safety. If powerful people were involved, resisting might bring dangerous consequences. That afternoon, Martha received an unexpected visitor. It was Father Joseph, who had come to the retirement home to check on her. Martha, said the priest, I came to see how you're doing, and also to bring you some information that might be important. He explained that he had spoken with other families who had been pressured to sell their properties. He had uncovered important details about how the operation worked. They use different strategies with each family, the priest said. With some, they make offers too good to refuse. With others, they use intimidation. And with the most resistant, they create situations of extreme pressure. Martha realized her situation fit into the last group. By refusing outright to sell, they had escalated to more drastic methods. Father, Martha said, I'm thinking of giving up. Maybe it's better to take the money and avoid more trouble. Father Joseph listened to Martha's concerns with understanding, but also shared a different perspective. Martha, he said, sometimes God places challenges in our path not to destroy us, but to make us stronger. Maybe this situation is an opportunity for you to do something important. What kind of important thing? Martha asked. If you have a mineral fortune on your property, the priest explained, you could use it to help the whole community, create jobs, improve infrastructure, help families in need. This perspective made Martha pause. She had never considered the possibility of using potential wealth for the good of the community. The dog, which had been quiet during the conversation, approached Father Joseph. It was the first time he had interacted with anyone besides Martha and her family. This dog has something special, the priest observed, petting him. He seems to understand people in an extraordinary way. He showed up right when I needed him most, Martha said. If it weren't for him, I might have had a very bad time in the desert. The priest stayed a while longer, talking with Martha, offering spiritual support and encouragement. When he left, Martha felt more hopeful about the future. That evening, Martha had dinner in the common room with the other residents. It was comforting to be around people, even if they weren't her family. Ms. Caroline, the 80-year-old woman, sat beside Martha during dinner. She had spent the day thinking about Martha's story. Martha, Ms. Caroline said, I have something to tell you, something that might be important for your situation. Martha was curious. Ms. Caroline seemed like a wise and experienced woman, someone whose advice was worth hearing. 50 years ago, Ms. Caroline said, my late husband worked on geological surveys in this area. He always said there were valuable minerals here, but he could never prove it. This revelation surprised Martha. It was possible that the presence of coltan on her property had been known for decades. Did he mention specific properties? Martha asked. He had maps, Ms. Caroline replied. Maps marking areas where he suspected minerals might be. I still have those maps stored away. Martha felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. If there really were old maps showing mineral deposits, they could be crucial for understanding the current situation. Ms. Caroline, Martha said, would it be possible to see those maps? Of course, Ms. Caroline answered. My daughter lives here in town and has all her father's things stored away. I can ask her to bring the maps tomorrow. The dog lay at Martha's feet, but his ears were perked up, as if he were paying attention to the conversation about the maps. That night, Martha slept a little better. The possibility of having more information about her property gave her hope that they might find a solution to the whole situation. The next day, Ashley arrived early to visit Martha. She brought more news about the investigation and also about caring for the animals. "Grandma, Brandon said your goats are producing milk normally," said Ashley, "and the hens have started laying eggs regularly again." "That's good," replied Martha, relieved. "I was worried all this stress might affect the animals." Ashley also shared that the sheriff had uncovered more information about Southwest Mining Corp. The shell company was connected to a broader network of illegal mining operations. "It seems our situation is just the tip of the iceberg," said Ashley. "There's a much larger operation happening in the area." Martha told Ashley about Ms. Caroline and the old maps that might show the location of minerals in the region. "This could be very important, Grandma," said Ashley. "If the maps prove there's ancient knowledge about minerals here, it could help show these companies didn't just stumble upon anything by chance." That morning, Ms. Caroline's daughter arrived at the care home with a box of old documents. Among them were the geological maps her father had produced decades earlier. Martha, Ashley, and Ms. Caroline gathered in the living room to examine the maps. The dog lay nearby, as if wanting to be part of the important meeting. The maps were detailed and showed various areas of the region marked with symbols indicating potential mineral deposits. Martha's property was clearly labeled as an area of interest. "My father always said this region had potential," said Ms. Caroline's daughter, "but back then, there wasn't enough technology to confirm his suspicions." Ashley took photos of all the maps with her phone to send to Sheriff Matthews. Those old documents could be crucial evidence in the investigation. "Ms. Caroline," said Martha, "these maps might be the key to understanding everything that's happening. How can I thank you?" "No need to thank me," replied Ms. Caroline. "If these maps can help bring justice, then my husband would be proud." When Ashley sent the photos of the maps to the sheriff, he immediately recognized their importance. He asked for them to be brought to the station for further analysis. Martha decided to go with Ashley to the sheriff's office. She wanted to be there when the maps were officially examined. The dog, as always, followed Martha. He seemed to understand that every move they made was important for resolving the situation. At the station, Sheriff Matthews was meeting with technicians from the geology department. They were impressed by the quality and detail of the old maps. "These maps confirm that the presence of minerals in this region has been known for decades," said the lead geologist. "This completely changes our understanding of the case." The sheriff explained that with this evidence, they could prove the mining companies weren't legitimate discoverers of the resources, but were instead taking advantage of information that already existed. "Ms. Martha," said the sheriff, "these maps significantly strengthen your legal position. They prove your property has been recognized as valuable for a long time." Martha was relieved by the news, but also concerned about the implications. If her property had been known to be valuable for decades, why had no one tried to exploit it before? The geologist explained that coltan extraction technology had advanced greatly in recent years, making it feasible to mine deposits once considered inaccessible. "Besides," said the geologist, "the price of coltan has risen drastically in the last 5 years due to demand for electronic devices." This information helped Martha understand why her property had become so valuable so suddenly. It wasn't just about the mineral itself. It was about the economic viability of extracting it. During the meeting at the sheriff's office, Kevin arrived asking to speak with Martha. He had spent several days reflecting on everything that had happened. "Grandma," said Kevin, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to do something to help resolve this situation." "What do you have in mind?" asked Martha. Kevin explained that he had kept phone numbers and other information about Jackson and Joey that he hadn't shared with the police. He had been afraid of retaliation, but now he wanted to cooperate fully. "I have recorded conversations on my phone," said Kevin. "Conversations where they mention names of other people involved in the operation." This revelation caught Sheriff Matthews' attention. Direct evidence like recordings could be crucial in identifying everyone involved. Kevin handed his phone over to the forensic team for analysis. In the recordings, Jackson and Joey repeatedly mentioned someone called Dr. Mitchell. Dr. Mitchell, repeated the sheriff. That name has come up in other investigations related to illegal mining. The sheriff explained that Dr. Mitchell was suspected of coordinating several illegal mining operations in the Southwest, but they had never gathered enough evidence to arrest him. With these recordings, said the sheriff, we finally have something concrete against him. Martha was amazed at how things were unfolding. What had started as an attempt to steal her property was turning into a complex criminal investigation. The dog remained close to Martha, watching all the conversations and movements. His presence continued to be a source of comfort amid all the complexity. When they left the sheriff's office, Martha felt there was finally real progress in resolving her situation, but she also knew there was still much work ahead. "Grandma," said Ashley during the drive back to Peaceful Haven, "it seems like things are starting to work in our favor." "I hope so," replied Martha, "but I have a feeling this isn't over yet. Powerful people don't give up easily when fortunes in minerals are at stake." This observation proved prophetic. The next day, Martha received an unexpected visit at Peaceful Haven. A man in a suit, looking to be in his 50s, introduced himself as a lawyer for a mining company. He said there was an official offer to buy Martha's property. "Ms. Martha," said the lawyer, "my clients are prepared to make a very generous offer for your property. $500,000 paid in cash." The offer was significantly higher than any amount Martha had ever considered for her property, but after everything she had been through, she was suspicious of any proposal. "Who are your clients?" asked Martha. "A real estate development company that wants to build a resort in the area," replied the lawyer. "Your property would be perfect for the project." Martha knew it was a lie. After everything she had learned about the Colton, it was obvious their real interest was in mining. "I need to think about it," said Martha. "And I also need to consult my family." The lawyer didn't seem pleased with her response. He insisted the offer had a time limit and that opportunities like this wouldn't come again. "Ms. Martha," said the lawyer in a firmer tone, "sometimes it's better to accept a good offer than to risk losing everything." The words sounded like a veiled threat, making Martha even more determined to refuse. She told the lawyer her answer would be no. After he left, Martha immediately called Ashley to tell her about the visit. It was important for the whole family to know about this new attempt at pressure. "Grandma, $500,000 is a lot of money," said Ashley. "But if the property really has a fortune in Colton, it could be worth much more than that." Martha agreed. Besides, she was determined not to be intimidated by people who used threats to get what they wanted. That night, Martha talked to Miss Caroline about the lawyer's visit. The older woman had a lot of life experience, and her advice was always valuable. "Martha," said Miss Caroline, "when someone offers you a lot of money quickly, it's usually because what you have is worth much more." "That's what I've been thinking," Martha replied. "But I'm also worried about my family's safety." Miss Caroline explained that in her experience, giving in to intimidation only encouraged the bullies to keep going. The best defense was to stand firm and rely on the support of the authorities. The dog lay between the two women, as if wanting to offer protection to both. His constant presence remained a comfort to Martha. The next morning, Sheriff Matthews called with important news. The analysis of Kevin's recordings had revealed crucial information about the illegal mining operation. "Mrs. Wilson," said the Sheriff, "we've located Dr. Mitchell. He's under investigation by multiple authorities and his arrest is imminent." This news gave Martha hope. If the leader of the operation was arrested, maybe the threats and pressure would stop. The sheriff also mentioned that other families in the area were organizing to report the pressure they'd faced. Martha wasn't alone in her fight against the illegal miners. "Several families who sold their properties found out they were cheated," the sheriff said. "They're trying to cancel the sales in court." Martha was glad to hear others were also fighting for their rights. There was strength in unity. That afternoon, Brandon visited Martha, bringing news about her animals and strange activity on the property. "Mrs. Wilson," Brandon said, "I found new equipment near the spring. It looks like someone's still doing research on the land." This worried Martha. Even with the ongoing police investigation, the illegal miners were still pushing forward with their plans. "Brandon," Martha asked, Do you think it's safe for you to keep going there to tend to the animals? I'll keep going, Brandon replied firmly, but I'll always go in groups and let the police know beforehand. Sheriff Matthews had arranged regular patrols of the property, but Martha knew it was impossible to watch the vast land 24 hours a day. That night, Martha had a strange dream. She dreamed she was walking her property with the dog, and they found her late husband, Anthony, sitting near the spring. In the dream, Anthony said he'd kept secrets about the land because he knew they'd be important one day. He asked Martha to stay strong and not give up on the family's land. When Martha woke up, the dream felt very real. She wondered if there really were secrets about the property Anthony had never shared with her. The dog seemed to sense Martha had a troubling dream. He came close and rested his head on her lap, offering comfort. "Do you think my Anthony was trying to tell me something?" Martha asked the dog, who looked at her with his intelligent eyes. At breakfast, Martha told Miss Caroline about her dream. The older woman listened carefully and then offered an interesting perspective. "Martha," Miss Caroline said, "sometimes our dreams help us remember things our conscious mind has forgotten. Maybe Anthony really did tell you something important that you didn't think much of at the time." Martha tried to recall old conversations with her husband about the property. There were so many memories that it was hard to identify which one might be relevant. When Ashley arrived for her daily visit, Martha told her about the dream and asked if her granddaughter remembered any stories Grandpa Anthony used to tell. "Grandma," Ashley said, "I remember Grandpa always talked about a family treasure, but I always thought he was referring to the land itself, not something buried in it." This memory made Martha reflect. It was possible Anthony knew about the minerals but chose not to mine them for some reason. Maybe he knew extracting the minerals would be complicated, Ashley suggested, and he preferred to leave the decision to future generations. Martha was beginning to understand that her current situation might be the fulfillment of something Anthony had foreseen decades ago. That afternoon, Sheriff Matthews arrived at the nursing home with extraordinary news. Dr. Mitchell had been arrested, and during the search of his office, the police had found documents that changed everything. "Ms. Martha," the sheriff said, "we found forged contracts for the purchase of your property. They plan to fake your signature and take the land illegally." This revelation left Martha shocked. The criminals were prepared to go far beyond pressure and intimidation. "We also found evidence they did the same to other properties," the sheriff continued. "Several families were victims of document fraud." The sheriff explained that with this evidence, everyone involved in the operation could be prosecuted for multiple crimes. The investigation had turned into a large-scale criminal case. "And what does this mean for my property?" Martha asked. "It means you're completely free from any legal threat," the sheriff replied. "Your property is protected, and you can decide what to do with the minerals." Martha felt enormous relief. After weeks of uncertainty and fear, there was finally clarity about her legal situation. The mutt seemed to sense Martha's change in mood. He stood up and wagged his tail, as if celebrating the good news. "Sheriff," Martha said, "does this mean I can go back home?" "Yes," the sheriff answered, "but I recommend waiting a few more days until we're sure everyone involved has been identified and neutralized." Martha accepted the recommendation, though she was eager to return to her normal routine. Just a few more days, and she could resume her life. That night, Martha slept better than she had in weeks. Knowing she was safe and her property was protected brought a peace of mind she hadn't felt in a long time. When she woke the next morning, Martha felt renewed and full of energy. It was as if a huge weight had been lifted from her shoulders. During breakfast, Ms. Caroline commented on the change in Martha's expression. It was clear the good news had done her well. "Now you need to decide what to do with that mineral fortune," Ms. Caroline said. "It's an important decision that will affect not just you, but the whole region." Martha knew Ms. Caroline was right. Having a fortune in Colton on her property came with responsibilities she'd never imagined. When Ashley came to visit, Martha wanted to discuss exactly those responsibilities. It was important that the whole family be involved in decisions about the future. "Grandma," Ashley said, "have you thought about how you want to mine the minerals, if you even want to mine them?" "That's a good question," Martha replied. I don't know anything about mining. I'll need help to make informed decisions. Ashley suggested they look for consultants specializing in ethical and sustainable mining. It was important to ensure any extraction was done responsibly. Brandon arrived during the conversation and offered his perspective as someone who knew the area well and cared about the environment. Ms. Martha, Brandon said, any mining operation has to consider the impact on the community and nature. It can't just be about profit. Martha completely agreed. She had seen the damage illegal miners were willing to cause. Any project she supported would have to be different. Kevin also joined the family discussion. He wanted to contribute to the decisions, even knowing his opinion might not carry the same weight due to his past mistakes. Grandma, Kevin said, I'd like to help make sure any mining benefits the whole community. Maybe it's a way to make up for the harm I almost caused. Martha was moved by Kevin's willingness to make amends. It was clear he had learned from his mistakes and wanted to do the right thing. The dog lay at the center of the group, as if he were a family member taking part in the important meeting. His presence remained a symbol of unity and protection. During the discussion, the idea of creating a community cooperative to manage the mining operation came up. This would ensure the benefits were shared with all the families in the area. That's an interesting idea, Martha said, but would that be feasible? Brandon explained there were examples of successful mining cooperatives in other parts of the country. With proper planning and transparent management, it could work. Ashley volunteered to research mining cooperatives further and bring detailed information for the family to consider. The conversation went on for hours, with each family member contributing ideas and perspectives. It comforted Martha to have everyone's support in making such important decisions. When the family meeting ended, Martha felt confident about the future. She had a united family, support from the authorities, and now a clear vision of how she wanted to proceed. That night, Martha wrote a letter to her late husband, Anthony. It was her way of processing everything that had happened and honoring his memory. In the letter, she thanked Anthony for protecting the family property and leaving clues about its importance. She promised to use any wealth wisely and responsibly. The dog stayed by Martha's side as she wrote, as if understanding the emotional weight of the moment. 3 days later, Sheriff Matthews gave Martha official permission to return to her property. Everyone involved in the illegal mining operation had been identified and arrested. Martha prepared to leave the care home with a mix of joy and nervousness. She was eager to go home, but also knew her life would never be the same. Ms. Caroline said goodbye to Martha warmly, saying she hoped to visit her at the property once everything was settled. Martha, Ms. Caroline said, you weathered a storm and came out stronger. I'm sure you'll make the right decisions about your future. The dog showed great excitement when he realized they were preparing to leave. It was as if he knew they were going home. The trip back to the property was emotional for Martha. Every mile brought her closer to her normal life, her routine, her animals. When they finally arrived, Martha was overjoyed to see her goats and chickens again. The animals seemed to recognize her immediately and showed delight at her return. The dog ran around the yard, checking every corner as if inspecting whether everything was in order for Martha's homecoming. The house had been cleaned and organized by Ashley and Brandon during Martha's absence. Everything was exactly as she liked it, a warm and familiar home. On that first night back home, Martha felt truly at peace for the first time in weeks. She was where she belonged, surrounded by her things and her animals. The dog slept on the bed with Martha, just as he had during their stay at the care home. It was clear he considered himself her permanent protector. In the days that followed, Martha gradually settled back into her normal routine, taking care of the animals, keeping up the house, receiving visits from family. It was comforting to return to simplicity, but Martha also knew she needed to make decisions about the future. The presence of Colton on her property remained a reality that demanded attention. A week after her return, Martha received a visit from a sustainable mining consultant Ashley had contacted. It was a man named Professor Sanders, an expert in responsible mineral extraction. Ms. Martha, Professor Sanders said, I understand you have a Colton deposit on your property. and want to explore it ethically. Exactly, Martha replied. But I don't know where to start. I never imagined I'd one day have to make decisions about mining. Professor Sanders explained the necessary steps to develop a responsible mining project. First, detailed technical studies would be needed to determine exactly how much coltan was on the property. After that, the professor said, we'd need to develop an extraction plan that minimizes environmental impact and maximizes benefits for the community. Martha was impressed by the complexity of the process, but also encouraged to know it could all be done responsibly. Professor Sanders also explained the financial implications. A well-managed coltan deposit could generate wealth for decades but required significant initial investment. Ms. Martha, the professor said, you have a few options. You could sell the mining rights to a reputable company, form a partnership, or develop the project through a community cooperative. Martha was more drawn to the idea of a community cooperative, which would allow the entire region to benefit from the mineral wealth. The dog stayed close throughout the entire conversation with Professor Sanders, as if wanting to take part in the important decisions about the property's future. After Professor Sanders left, Martha reflected on everything she had learned. It was astonishing how drastically her life had changed in just a few weeks. That night, Martha had another dream about her late husband, Anthony. This time he was smiling and saying how proud he was of the decisions she was making. In the dream, Anthony explained that he had always known about the minerals, but chose not to extract them because the technology of the time didn't allow for responsible mining. Now it's different, Anthony said in the dream. Now it's possible to extract the minerals without destroying the land. That's what I was waiting for. When Martha woke up, she felt confirmed in her decision to proceed with responsible and sustainable mineral extraction. Over the following days, Martha received several visits from experts, lawyers, and representatives of organizations that could help develop a mining cooperative. Each conversation brought new information and perspectives. Martha was quickly learning about a world she had never imagined would be part of her life. The dog remained her constant companion through all these meetings. His presence provided emotional stability amid so many changes and decisions. One of the most important visits was from representatives of other communities that had successfully developed mining cooperatives. They brought practical examples of how to make it work. Miss Martha, said one of the representatives, a woman named Bethany, the secret is total transparency and community participation in all decisions. Martha was impressed by the results other cooperatives had achieved, not just material wealth, but also infrastructure development, education, and healthcare. After several weeks of consultations and studies, Martha made her final decision. She would create a community cooperative to mine coltan sustainably and ethically. The first community meeting to discuss the cooperative was held at the local school. Martha was moved to see so many neighbors and friends eager to participate in the project. Father Joseph opened the meeting with a prayer, thanking Martha for choosing to share her good fortune with the community. Friends, Martha said to the assembly, this land has belonged to my family for generations, but I believe the wealth we've discovered here belongs to all of us. Martha's proposal was met with enthusiasm by the community. Several people volunteered to take an active role in developing the cooperative. Kevin stood out as one of the most dedicated to the project, eager to make up for past mistakes by contributing positively. Ashley offered her educational skills to develop training programs for cooperative members. Brandon volunteered to oversee the technical and environmental aspects of the mining operation. The dog was present at the meeting, lying at Martha's feet. Many in the community remarked how the animal had become a symbol of protection and good luck. In the following months, the cooperative was officially established, with Martha as honorary president. Technical studies confirmed there was enough coltan to sustain operations for at least 30 years. The first year exceeded all expectations. Responsible mining created local jobs and resources to improve the region's infrastructure. Martha used her share of the profits to expand her livestock farm and support educational projects in the community. She never forgot her humble roots. The dog remained her loyal companion, now recognized by the entire community as the animal that had not only saved Martha, but indirectly the whole region. The story of Martha and the dog that found her tied to the saguaro became a local legend, passed down through generations as an example of how courage and generosity can transform lives. Kevin fully redeemed himself through his dedicated work in the cooperative, becoming one of its most respected managers and proof that people can change and grow. Ashley developed educational programs that drew attention from nearby universities, raising the level of education available to local children. Brandon specialized in sustainable mining and became a sought-after consultant, helping other communities develop similar projects. The region, once known only for drought and economic hardship, became a model of sustainable development and shared prosperity. At 73, Martha realized true wealth wasn't in the coltan buried on her land, but in using that wealth to benefit others. Father Joseph often used Martha's story in his sermons as an example of how God works in mysterious ways to bring good into the world. The retirement home where Martha had stayed temporarily benefited from the cooperative's donations, improving services for the elderly in the area. Ms. Caroline, the woman whose old maps had been crucial in solving the case, was honored as a community hero. Sheriff Matthews received recognition for his exemplary investigation, which led to the dismantling of an illegal mining network operating in multiple regions. Martha Wilson's property became a model for how mineral extraction could coexist harmoniously with environmental preservation and community well-being. The dog, which never received an official name, became known throughout the area simply as the Guardian. He continued living with Martha until the end of his days. The spring where it all began was preserved and became a pilgrimage site for people who wanted to reflect on protection, providence, and second chances. The cooperative established an educational fund that allowed several children from the region to attend universities, later returning to contribute to local development. Martha started an annual tradition of celebrating the day she was found, tied to the cactus, not as a day of suffering but as the beginning of an extraordinary transformation. The story spread beyond the region, inspiring other communities to seek cooperative and sustainable forms of economic development. The spot where Martha had been tied to the saguaro was turned into a memorial, with a plaque telling the story and honoring all those who helped resolve the situation. Kevin eventually married and had children, raising them with the values of honesty and community responsibility he had learned through his experience of nearly losing everything. The cooperative developed innovative extraction technologies that minimized environmental impact, becoming a benchmark for other mining operations in the country. Martha lived to see her great-grandchildren playing on the same property where she had grown up, knowing their future was secure thanks to the difficult decisions she had made. Professor Sanders, the sustainable mining consultant, documented Martha's case in a book that became an academic reference on responsible community development. The region established a sustainable tourism program, allowing visitors to learn about responsible mining while contributing to the local economy. Sheriff Matthews retired a few years later, but continued visiting Martha regularly. They developed a deep friendship based on mutual respect and shared experience. Frank, the truck driver who had found Martha in the desert, became an official transporter for the cooperative, proud to have played a crucial role in the story of transformation. St. Francis Church, where Father Joseph had offered shelter to the group during their escape, received donations from the cooperative for renovations and expansion of its social programs. Frances, Brandon's mother, who had offered her home as refuge, was honored by the cooperative as one of the heroines of the story. The Smith family, who had sold their property to the illegal miners, managed to nullify the sale in court and return to the region, joining the cooperative. The police patrol system developed during the investigation became permanent, ensuring security for all rural properties in the area. Martha established a sanctuary for abandoned animals on part of her property, inspired by her experience with the dog that had changed her life. The cooperative partnered with universities for ongoing research into sustainable mining techniques and environmental preservation. Martha's case became a study in law schools, demonstrating how justice can prevail even against powerful adversaries. The region established an annual festival celebrating community cooperation and sustainable development, attracting visitors from across the country. In her later years, Martha often sat by the spring with the mutt, reflecting on how a terrible situation had turned into the greatest blessing of her life. Martha's legacy reached far beyond her property, inspiring a new generation of community leaders committed to ethical and sustainable development. The story of the mutt that found Martha tied to the saguaro became a symbol of hope, showing how help can come from the most unexpected places in the toughest times. The cooperative established strict environmental protection protocols that became a model for the entire U.S. mining industry. Martha lived to be 92, surrounded by a thriving, tight-knit community she had helped build through her courage and generosity. When Martha finally passed, she was buried in a simple grave on the property, beside her husband Anthony. The mutt was laid to rest at her feet a few months later. The property is still managed by the cooperative to this day, bringing prosperity to hundreds of families and serving as an example of how mineral wealth can be a force for good. The spring continues to flow crystal clear, a lasting symbol of renewal, hope, and the wisdom of preserving natural resources for future generations. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of the story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave your honest thoughts in the comments. Do you think Martha made the right choice by starting the cooperative? We'd love to hear your opinion. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heartwarming stories.